It's just like regretting. All right, cool. All right, so with me today, I have Matthew Marquardt. Matt is sort of really had a bit of a breakout year in 2024 with long course triathlon, coming fourth overall in the Ironman Pro Series. And I thought I'd get Matt on today and reached out to him over social media. Matt's from the East Coast of America. And just to find out about how he manages the very big task of trying to be a doctor and doing cancer research at the same time as managing the massive hours of long course triathlon and also doing very well at it. So yeah, we've got Matt on today, and then we'll say hi to Matt and see how he does it all. So
yeah.
How you got, Matt?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, then no, awesome. And again, really appreciate you making the time to come and chat to some randoms over in Australia. And maybe if there's a Ironman over here that you come to, we can connect you with some people as well. Make some relationships. Yeah. So Matt, obviously at the moment you're sort of charging hard through the long course scene with Ironman and the 70.3s. So if we, as I was sort of talking about, we're really trying to help out our younger ones who are starting to take those first steps into sort of an elite pathway. Do you want to give us a bit of a background of your pathway in your formative years and sort of, were you doing triathlon at a young age, or what were you doing other sports, and then sort of how you, I guess, flip that switch to sort of focus on triathlon?
Yeah, so I think my formative years, I think in many regards, were very typical of kind of the older generation of triathletes, and maybe, I guess, more atypical of the current generation, where I did not start triathlon until my 20s. I grew up basically playing every sport under the sun, and I played, soccer and lacrosse, which is a very American sport.
Yep.
As well as like track, cross country, swimming, kind of throughout elementary school as well as into high school. And it was pretty clear kind of start of high school for me. So around around 14 years of age, it was clear that kind of swimming was going to be my pathway into college, and that I had the potential to be recruited to swim collegiately. And so even though I played all those different sports throughout high school, my focus was always on swimming, and sometimes that meant that I was doing two sports in the same season. There were definitely like seasons where like I would run to school because that would be my running workout for the day, and then I'd go to swim practice in the afternoon. And then I was on a bike from a very young age. My parents were kind of weekend cyclists, and they got me a bike when I was, I don't even know how old, and I was doing like 50, 60 mile, so 100K rides with them.
At what age would that been?
Like, honestly, before the age of 10.
Holy hell!
But like I had a special size bike that had 650 cc wheels instead of 700 cc wheels.
Your legs would have been going crazy.
Yeah. And so I was on a bike from a really young age, but I never raced bikes. I never did triathlon or anything. Cycling was always just kind of for fun, and never really trained it. And then kind of college happened, and really didn't do any cycling in college for probably 4 years besides just biking to class. And I would run in the off season, or kind of, I guess, the border of the beginning of the season, just as a way to cross train. But again, in college, I never competed or trained running like seriously. The focus was always on swimming. And then my senior year, my last year of college, was kind of the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so at that point, my senior year was canceled, and I kind of started looking for other things to do. And the crazy thing that I decided to do was, during our winter break, I decided to bike across the US, because I'd never had a month of time where I didn't have any commitments. Because it was always like from one sport to the next, was pretty much how it always was. And so even during the summertime, like, I didn't really have a month to just do like something, whatever I wanted. And
Yeah.
so I decided to bike across the US, really as just kind of like a failure attempt. I didn't have the best relationship with swimming in college. It was very much love-hate, where I loved the sport, but I wasn't really swimming well and was like struggling because of that. And so I kind of just wanted to do something that like would really push my limits.
Yeah.
And so I decided to bike across the country, because at that point, even though I'd biked a lot growing up, I'd never biked more than 100 miles at a single time. And in order to, based on the timeline that I had to average 110 miles a day for 23 days to get across the US.
So we're talking about 100, and I'm trying to put it into Australian terms. So that's about 180K maybe.
Yeah, 180K.
An Ironman every day.
an Ironman bike distance every day, basically.
Yeah.
And for 23 days, with no off days. And so like I was looking forward to kind of, pushing myself. And the human body is really incredible in that, like, I actually got stronger as I went. And so by the end of the trip, I was doing probably about 240 to 260K a day. And I ended up doing the whole ride in 19 and a half days instead of 23 days.
Yeah, wow. So where did you, I know we might go off on a tangent, but where did you start? Where did you finish?
So I started in San Diego on December 30th in 2020. And then I finished in Jacksonville, Florida.
The southern sort of part of the States.
Yeah, so I basically like started Southern California, went right along the US-Mexico border, then went straight across Texas, and then kind of hugged the coastline the rest of the way to Florida. Because it was December, which is the winter months for us. And so there wasn't really an option to go further north, because I would have been impacted by too much snow.
Yeah, that would have been even, because I followed the Trans Am a little bit, and that kind of cross-continental stuff is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
And you did it unsupported, just carried all your own stuff?
Well, I did it with my dad, and so my dad kind of sagged me, and so he would stop at lunch, give me food, and then pick me up at the end of the day, and then we'd go to a hotel and whatnot. And so it was a really cool experience. And when I finished that, I was kind of looking for my next thing to train for, and so decided to sign up for a 70.3. So at this point, I was 23 years old, and signed up for a 70.3 with the intention of only doing one, and did that race and ended up doing really well. And so I think, one thing, I don't know, I guess triathlon has this very strong culture, I think, of self-training, which I think in many ways is great. But so I initially was like, I'm going to self-train as well. A lot of other people do it. But I kind of realized after like 2 or 3 weeks that what I was doing wasn't necessarily very efficient. I was basically like getting on the bike and biking as hard as I could for an hour and a half to 2 hours, going out and doing a 15K run as hard as I could. And like, that was my training.
And you didn't have a squad or a club you were training with? You just trained by yourself?
Just training by myself. And so after about like 2 or 3 weeks of that, I kind of reached out to a coach who's been my coach ever since. And that's, I think, just been super productive. I'm a big advocate just in general of like finding experts in different domains and either having them, either delegating the work to them or like learning from them. Because I think like that's the best way to like get the most out of life.
And does your coach overall just manage, the different parts that are going on, or when you say coach, is that a specialist coach, or is that someone who sort of is managing the whole thing?
He does everything for me. You swim, bike, and run. And I think, in the last year or two, we've kind of adopted more of like a pro cycling team style approach where like we have experts that we consult on different things, but ultimately he's the one that still writes all my training and everything. So, so signed up for the 70.3 and intended on only doing one, and then ended up doing really well. I got 4th overall and qualified for 70.3 Worlds. And
And what was your time? So some people who are going to watch this are going to be thinking,
So
what's his time?
I was 4:05.
Your first 70.3.
In my first 70.3, yeah. And qualified for 70.3 worlds. And so at that point, I was like, I had just graduated college and I was about to start medical school in like 4 months. And 70.3 worlds was about 6 weeks into the start of medical school. And I was like, okay, like I'll do it, use it as a resume booster. and then like that'll be it. Because there's no way that I can do both.
Okay.
And so then I went to that race and I ended up getting second overall in my age group for 18 to 24-year-olds. And that was really kind of when the big decision point needed to be made, which is like, okay, do I just go back and be a medical student, or do I really pursue this thing? Which was a little bit of a leap of faith, because I was good as an age grouper, but by no means was I like pro level. Like I still finished 30 to 40 minutes behind like the winner of the pro race at 70.3 worlds. And that's in a 70.3. So like,
do you remember who the male pro winner was that year?
Yeah, that was the year that Gustav won in St. George. And so it was like, okay, like, I'm good as an age grouper, but like still pretty far away from being good as a pro. And so ultimately decided to take the leap of faith, because basically I consulted with a bunch of people and everyone was like, if you truly think that you can be good at this, like this will open up doors and pay dividends way beyond what you could do just as a traditional medical student. And so that's really when I decided to take the leap. And then 2022, I raced as an age grouper for the whole season. And I think one thing that's important about that is I earned my pro card that first season that I did, because there was a USA Olympic distance race that I competed in, and I placed high enough that I could have taken a pro card and started racing as a pro. But I think one thing that's important for a lot of people to like hear about is that just because you can go pro doesn't mean you should. And that there's value sometimes in staying as an age grouper for another year or two, and really developing so that when you become a pro, you can actually race as a pro. Because the pro dynamics are different, and how the race goes is different. And there can be value sometimes as being an age grouper and really learning how to race your own race. And then once you're good enough to actually race other people, to then transitioning into the pro pool.
It's like having that space to kind of stay in your bubble and keep working on the gaps and strengths that you have before you, because once you go up to a high level of racing, you get so fixated on more intensity and competing, and if you're not able to compete, that can be negatively charged.
Right. Yeah. Sure. And I mean, my coach and I have definitely talked a bit about like, other people we've seen that have converted to a pro, and it's probably been a negative thing for their development. So anyway, so I raced that entire 2022 year as an age grouper and did really well. And obviously it's fun to win, so that helped things too. And I ended up winning Kona as an age grouper that year, which was like kind of one of the big goals for the year. So that was really great. And then 2023 was when I converted to be a pro, and then the rest, I guess, is kind of history. So,
so really, you're only 2 years as a pro now. Crazy fast. Well, I guess you look at the scheme of things, it's not fast because it all started before you were 10 almost.
Yeah.
I
think that's one thing as well that I think is really unique about triathlon is like, yes, I've only been in the sport for call it 3.5 years. Only 2 years racing as a pro, but there's this huge base. I've got like probably 6 or 7, probably have 7 or 8,000 hours of swimming under my belt already, which is all cardio. And so, like I've, only done, I don't know, call it 3,000 hours of triathlon specific stuff. I probably have I don't know, 12 to 15,000 hours of other types of cardio, depending on how you want to calculate it under my belt. And so it's been more really about just translating that cardio and that metabolic base into the sport of triathlon. And I think that's a big part of the reason why I've had such a rapid rise.
Yeah. And as a swimmer, you still learn how to be an athlete. You still learn all those, performance behaviors, nutrition and sleep and looking after yourself and backing up sessions and that sort of thing as well, which is triathlon related.
Right.
Yeah. So going back a little bit, because we have a number of Australian athletes, especially runners, who pick up NCAA scholarships for track and cross country, and a few that will go over to triathlon and NCAA, which is obviously a smaller sport because it's female only in the States, but still provides, I guess, a bit of a pathway option for them. Are you able to sort of shed some light on a little bit how swimming worked with NCAA, what the training was like, what kind of support you got, and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so it's actually really interesting. I graduated in 2021, and since then, NCAA sports in the U.S. has changed dramatically. Like, it's almost unrecognizable to when
NIL stuff
3 years ago, because there have been all these different laws have passed. It used to be that when I was around 3 years ago, that I could not make any money off sponsorships as a collegiate athlete, whereas now that's like completely changed, and there are football players that are making $5-10 million in sponsorships a year, and so the landscape has just totally changed. But I think, at least so far, the general structure of how recruiting works and everything is the same, which it all depends sport to sport. So sometime around, how to convert it. So in the US, most people start college when they're 18 years old. So for swimming, that means that you're being recruited probably somewhere between 15 and 17 years old is when you're being recruited. And I think the biggest thing, this is just a general life lesson, is that unless you're really, truly one of the best in the world, people are never going to come to you. But if you express interest in them, they will express a lot of interest back. And so, I mean, this has been the same case with sponsors for me. Like, I do have some sponsors that have reached out to me and been like, hey, we'd love to bring you on or whatnot. But like all of the sponsors that I currently have, I reached out to first. And it was because of my pedigree that they then wanted to take me on. So I think that's like a really important just life lesson for pretty much anything that, it's a very select set of people that have people knocking on their doors all the time.
Able to just sit back.
We want you. Yeah. And, but anyway, so recruiting happens kind of in those 15 to 17-year-old years. And then you get to college. And so for swimming, that's a winter sport. And so you're limited to 20 hours a week, which is kind of like a wink, wink, like nudge, nudge type of a thing where some schools abide by it more than others. And, there's a lot of loopholes that you can use so that you can end up training 25 or 30 hours a week, depending on the school. I was very fortunate with where I went. That was very strictly followed. And also in some schools, you are treated more as an employee or a professional athlete than you are a student. So I went to Princeton University, and the Ivy League makes it very, very well known that like sport is there to aid your education. And so there's still a very heavy emphasis on performing at the highest level that you can as an athlete, but also there's the recognition by the coaches that, hey, you're coming to Princeton to get an education. And so what that meant is like at some schools, you're not allowed to take certain classes because those classes conflict with practice times. That was never the case at Princeton. It was like, if there was a class that I wanted to take and for whatever reason it conflicted with practice, the coach would be like, okay, let's figure out a different time for you to come in and swim.
Yeah.
And
so that sounds very similar to the Australian university sport relationship. It's academics first and then sport is a fairly distant second.
Yeah. And that's like, but that's at where I went. Whereas like if you go
Yeah.
to Ohio State or Cal or Texas or, some of those bigger name schools where you're getting paid full rides and scholarship and you're getting all these other perks as well, it can sometimes be flipped where it's like, hey, you're a swimmer first and you're a student second. And so that's just a choice that you have to make when you're deciding where you want to go to school.
So that's a pretty good question for potential Australians who are looking at NCAA to ask those schools.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's super important. And it's honestly like, you don't really want to ask the coach because I think the coach will always say like, yeah, we support you. I think it's really trying to say like, okay, asking a current athlete there, like, what's your schedule like? How does the coach, support you in terms of your academics? Or, like, I also think if you were to somehow able to like slide in there, like, hey, I'm interested in doing medicine, would you support that? And if they automatically say no, then like that's a pretty big red flag that they don't really want to support your education that much.
Yeah.
And they want you to do something easier.
Yeah, definitely. That's some really good tips for us. Because NCAA Elite World Triathlon short course, long course is a little bit more well known, but just generally taking that next step is a bit of a black hole. So it's good to have those specific tips for everyone. So sort of semi-random question, but short course triathlon, the World Triathlon Series, and that Olympic pathway. That obviously sounds like it was never a thought or an option, or you had any people who were involved in your pathway or your development that were leaning that way. Is that something you've ever thought of, or is it all sort of, from doing that massive ride across America and signing up for your first 70.3, that was always kind of go from there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a couple things. I did, when I first got into triathlon, it was kind of on the table and it was something that I considered, but it was never something that I really ever took tangible steps towards, because for a couple of reasons. One is that, so the reason why it was of interest to me is that I grew up as a swimmer. And so of course the Olympics is like the height of the sport. And I think for triathlon, I mean, I guess depending on who you ask, that may or may not be the case. Obviously, winning an Olympic gold medal in triathlon is incredibly prestigious and a huge accomplishment, but I think a lot of people would consider winning Kona to be just as big, if not bigger, of an accomplishment. And so there are a couple things. I mean, I think financially, there's a lot more money in long course stuff. And also, I mean, we knew that, like, I think a lot of triathletes will start short course and then slowly move up their distance. And like, it was clear that I was good at long course stuff from the get-go and like didn't necessarily need to like have the short course development, et cetera. And also my plan is not to do this for 20 years. We don't really know how much longer I'll be in the sport, but like, generally speaking, like my timeline in the sport's like probably 5 to 7 years, somewhere around there. And so it was like, I want to focus on what I'm going to be the best at and specialize in just that area. And also, as a medical student, I can't really afford to fly around the world every other week to go to an ITU race. It's just a lot. And there's a lot of reasons, from the logistics to the finances to also like, it was pretty clear that I had the engine for long course stuff, as to why the ITU pathway kind of got shut down pretty quickly.
So with your engine, and whether you want to let people know this or not, but have you had VO2 testing? And we sort of, over here, we lean on like a 400 meter swim time and a 1500 meter 5K run time as some benchmarks we try and focus towards. Have you got any numbers like that you'd want to share?
Actually, no. One thing that I really liked about my coach from the beginning is that we never really did any testing like that. Some coaches are like, let's do an FTP test, once a month or whatnot. I think one of the things that I learned from swimming that for me was focusing on specific times or test benchmarks was counterproductive, because then you're like, let's say you do an FTP test once a month. For me personally, that entire month I'm like focused on that one test in that one day. Whereas really to get better, what you need to do is you need to focus on each workout of each day. And it's that consistency over time. And so really we've just used the development that we've seen in training as the indication of progress versus testing specific things. And for the first year and a half, we did pretty much all my workouts based purely off of RPE. And then kind of since then, we've used lactate as our primary, lactate kind of guided by heart rate a little bit as our primary indicator for effort in training zone and whatnot. Instead of like any specific tests or anything like that.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that makes sense to me because you're focusing on the process of getting better, not the result.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. No, that's awesome. So with a lot going on, I'm just going back to some sort of key questions I was thinking about. I remember I was watching a Bob Babbitt interview with yourself and sort of asked, like, what does your day look? And I think you said it basically starts at 6 and ends at 6 most days. And then I remember talking about how you set up your training, approach your training, and every session you do is very it's got some kind of target or objective in it. Even if it's a run, it's a cadence thing, or whatever it might be. How do you find? Because some people kind of get into the sport and they're kind of good at it because they just enjoy training and they enjoy going for a run and just clearing the head and that sort of thing. How do you mentally refresh yourself and have that mental downtime? Because it sounds like you're obviously a very high cognitive academic and medical career, and then triathlon you're sounds like you're pretty engaged into each session you do. So what are your ways to mentally keep yourself fresh?
Yeah, I mean, I think for like kind of first response to that is that really I think what drives me in the sport more than anything else is the improvement, and kind of seeing the improvement day over day, month over month, year over year. I think that's really what I've enjoyed the most. And I mean, I think like you get the most excitement out of a workout that goes really well, or something like that more than anything else. And I think, for me, triathlon is my escape from medicine and medicine is my escape from triathlon. And so I definitely will say, leading up to Kona, I really kind of cleared my schedule for a good 2 weeks, and did minimal medicine work. And then like, by the time I'm like done by that and like coming back, I'm
internet.
hang on, I want to make sure I got you. Okay.
Yeah, it just froze up.
And that enables me to recharge. And so, yes, I'm constantly doing stuff, but they're different and they're like utilizing different sets of my focus and brain power and whatnot. And I definitely do need some time to like recuperate at the end of the season. Like last weekend, my girlfriend and I, we just went basically camping for a weekend and minimally trained and just kind of read and hung out. And so I'm fortunate in that I do need like time to recharge, but generally speaking, like a half or a full day of doing nothing is enough to fuel me for a long period of time. So I'm very fortunate in that regard. But I think like more so than anything else, I think the most important thing is to enjoy what you're doing. And I think that's really the key to burnout of any sort, like in life and in triathlon. And so I think that's really kind of been the big key.
Yeah. No, nice one. You probably already touched on it a little bit before about kind of, I guess, making the switch to go, down the pro triathlon route. And I think you said early in the medical studying medicine stage, you had that thought that, oh, I can't do the two.
Mhm.
I guess, yeah. What made you, when you're sort of doing medicine and you're at that thought timeline where you thought you couldn't do the two? How much training in triathlon were you doing, and then what? How did you manage that next step to progress the training up, and then obviously keep medicine going?
Yeah, so medical school in the US is predominantly like 2 years of lecture-based learning and then 2 years in the hospital. That's like by far the simplest, probably honestly an oversimplification of what medical school training is like in the US, but we're just going to use it for now. So during the first 2 years of medicine, it's predominantly lecture-based, and for the most part, I could just study whenever I wanted. So that kind of enabled me to do, those first 2 years was like 17 to 20 hours a week. And we would have a couple weeks where we'd hit like 22 or 23, and it would be pretty tough.
Yeah.
It wasn't really sustainable. I could do that for a week or two, but then the medical side of things would get so far behind that it would just kind of all fall apart. And so we really found like 17 to 20 hours was kind of the sweet spot. And then I kind of did something abnormal in that I took 2 years to focus on research, which is not typical. And so the research kind of prolonged that flexibility, and I was actually able to get up to about 25 to 27 hours of training for most weeks. But now, like starting this week, I'm doing clinical rotations. So I'm in the hospital now, and so we're kind of at a new phase where kind of once again, it's like, am I going to be able to do this or not? And so we're kind of figuring that out as we go. And I have confidence that my coach can kind of handle it and that we can figure it out, but it will probably be reduced a little bit to probably like 20 hours a week again. But like, I think, my coach has expressed confidence, and I trust him that he can get really good training in those 20 hours. And also, like, I have all that base built up from the times I was able to do higher volume. And so I think that will benefit me and just kind of play forward as well.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it's all worked. And I mean, I think for the most part, like the key is just been, I don't know, you just kind of figure it out as you go along, and you have, I guess,
adaptable,
some confidence and faith that it will work out, but also at the same time knowing that, like, if it doesn't, like, it's really not that big of a deal. like, if I were like, especially with hindsight, like, yeah, like I took, a leap and was like, okay, I'm gonna like, spend 20 hours a week training on triathlon that I'm not going to be able to spend studying or doing research. Like, yes, let's say that didn't work out. Like, I'm healthy for it. No one died. Like, no one died. Like, nothing like really bad happened. Yes, some time was lost, but like I still did well academically, and like, like, so I think that's like a big part of it is like, okay, like what's really the downside, like if it doesn't work out.
Yeah, so. Exactly. No, and and it obviously sounds like yourself and your coach and your team are doing a great job at managing it all and keeping perspective on the whole gamut of things that are going on.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Probably just jumping sort of timelines a little bit, but just we're talking about support and how you're managing things. Before you started seeing success, prize money or sponsors that you reached out to, how did you sort of support yourself making that jump? Because obviously at university, college, you're supported by the swim and the school. So when you sort of finished university, college, and you started triathlon, how did what did your support sort of system look like? Were you living at home?
So, I think one of the beauties of triathlon is that I think it's a very tight-knit community, even if you don't know each other. And so I was very fortunate in that along the way, people let me, like, for that first race, I was in a borrowed wetsuit and a borrowed bike. And like, so, and then kind of as things progressed, like I was given a wetsuit, and like I was I was given a bike eventually by, like, someone that I knew who kind of was like, this kid has some potential and I want to support him, and he wanted a new bike anyways. So it was a win-win. But like that was a big part of kind of the start of things, was just there was a lot of generosity from friends, families, and we'll call them semi-strangers that kind of helped me out in terms of with travel and with gear and stuff. And then you know, that kind of, I only had to deal with that for about a year and a half.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And then like then money started to come in, and so then that changes the picture. But I do think like it's not easy. Like it's not easy to, you know, get like a really good pay in this sport. And you know, things are definitely changing with the Pro Series and with the T100, where more money is being infused. But like at the end of the day, like triathlon is still a very niche sport, and so there's definitely money, but as with all sports, the vast majority of that money is concentrated at the top. And so it's not easy to get those sponsorships. And even when you do, they're not necessarily life-changing quantities of money. So
no, definitely not. So sort of, it sounds like basically do the best with what you have, and then just take those bits of help and support as you go along to build a better sort of support system.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Sure. And I mean, like, certainly, like, even now I'm still conscious about where I travel. For the most part, like I try and stay domestic in the US, one, to reduce costs and in terms of travel, but and also because logistically it's a lot easier. But like, I mean, I'd love to come to Australia, but like a trip to Australia is hard. Like it's expensive and
definitely
a lot of time and all that stuff. So
it'll be worth it.
Some other pros can do that, but you know, that's not me. Mainly from a logistical side of things. But
no. I totally understand and don't begrudge anyone.
Yeah.
No, that's all really good. Maybe sort of get to the end, you know, just to wrap things up a little bit. Are there, and it sounds like you've got it in perspective and you have a structured plan in your mind of how triathlon sits and how medicine sits and everything. But are there days where you sort of think, hey, let's just do one thing, you know, it's getting a bit too much or a bit too crazy, let's just stick with medicine and dial back the try?
Yeah, I mean, I think like, I mean, there's certainly days like that. They go both ways. There are days that I wish that I could only do triathlon, and there are days that I wish that I could only do medicine. But I don't know, maybe I get bored with only doing one thing too quickly. But
like you said, it's a bit of a holiday going back and forth.
Yeah. I think there's benefit to going back and forth, because then you don't get bored. But yeah, I mean, like I've certainly thought about both, but I think, like, as I kind of mentioned earlier, I think about having both kind of creates balance that is productive. And you know, like when I finish a triathlon workout, it's like, okay, I'm done. I'm focused on something else. Like I'm not thinking about that workout the rest of the day. About like, did it go well or did it not? And the implications for that. It's like, okay, that's done. On to the next one. And by the next one, the next one happens, I've forgotten what I did in the morning. So
definitely. I mean, what you're just speaking about, it's instead of looking at the things as competing, they're actually complementing in a lot of ways. And making it better.
Yeah, I mean, I like to take that perspective as much as possible. I mean, there are some objective facts that's not always true. Like there's definitely times where medicine doesn't provide sufficient recovery or sufficient sleep for triathlon. But I mean, I think those imperfections can be beneficial sometimes, because I think sometimes at least for me, if you try to over optimize everything, it can potentially like just take out all the fun in life.
trying to min max everything.
Right. Exactly.
Nice. Look, I think that's that's been super helpful and has given, because in Australia, you know, we sort of are at the end of the train line as far as the global sort of geography is concerned. And to hear how other athletes internationally are approaching things and have approached it in their learnings and experiences can really prompt some ideas back here, I think, and, you know, sort of show that because lot of the junior athletes are very, I guess, are very reliant, or think they should be reliant on the national sporting body to be their source of going into an elite career. And there's a few that have just gone, sort of a straight long course and kind of made it that way, but it's not very well known how they did it. So yeah, your life experience has really showed a different way of doing it, which I think a lot of athletes over here will find super helpful.
Yeah, and I mean, I think to speak to that a little bit, like I don't really know exactly why it is, but I feel like in very few sports, like maybe gymnastics is one of them, where my sense is that athletes truly rely on the sporting body for their success. I mean, like, I think, so to put that another way, like, I think there is definitely, for short course triathlon, there's definitely people that they want to do the Olympics. USA Triathlon is their path because there's really not many sponsorships in short course triathlon in the US.
Yeah,
I think probably similar, but like swimming, swimming's a huge sport in the US, and like USA Swimming has tons of money, but like I think most people view USA Swimming stipend as like supplementary instead of the only thing. Like stipend supplements either a job they have outside or money that's coming in from other sponsors. And I think that's like probably the case for most of the other sports. But I think like triathlon, short course triathlon, like there's definitely a little bit more reliance because there's so few sponsorship opportunities that come from industry for that specific sport. But no, definitely not. I never viewed USA Triathlon as being, the source of financial success in the sport. I always knew that it was going to come from prize money and extra sponsors.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. That's a really good lesson, I think. No, mate, again, like, really appreciate everything, and your time. We'll get this out to everyone, and I'm sure we'll have lots of good comments, and you might get a few more follows, but not too many.
Hey, whatever. I'll take whatever.
Yeah. All right, mate. Thanks for your time.
Of course.
And, have a good time in the States.
Yeah, have a good one.
Cheers. I'll just hit stop record.